Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I will introduce our moderator, Dan, and he will introduce us to the panelists. Our topic this afternoon is UK's cybersecurity revolution, professionalizations, global impact. Without further ado, Dan, please introduce the panel and we get started. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we'll explore how the UK is pioneering cybersecurity professionalization through the UK Cybersecurity Council. We have our general disclaimer from RSA that I think everyone's seen a million times. I'm Dan Gorecki. I'm a volunteer member of the UK Cybersecurity Council, and I am part of the technical working group. My day job, I am CISO at NGC Risk, and I'll be moderating the panel for today's discussion. Just quickly before we jump in, wanted to get by a show of hands. How many folks in the audience have heard of the UK Cybersecurity Council? Looks like about half, excluding you guys. For everyone, how many of you work in a global organization that has a presence in the UK? Okay. So for those, we want to just be able to provide a little additional context of the council and its work. So the Cyberforce does not have a professional architecture like our older established professions like law, accounting, or medicine, but we're seeing significant develops leading us down this road. The UK is often seen as a leader in the cyberspace, having consulted with the population on how to professionalize its workforce in 2018. They set up the UK Cybersecurity Council as a new professional body in 2022. The council has now set 8 professional standards across 8 cyber specialisms with support of the NCSC, and those that meet the standard have their names entered into the council's professional register. Earlier this year, the UK has established an international coalition of governments that will work together on this effort. Those governments of Canada, Dubai, Ghana, Japan, and Singapore, along with the UK, are the founding partners. Representatives from CISA and NICE have participated in the dialogue. So that's a little bit of background around the council, and we're going to dive deeper into that as we get into our conversation. But first, I'd like to introduce Andrew, who's from the UK government, who initiated the formation of the UK Cybersecurity Council and remains responsible for the funding effort. Andrew, can you share a little bit more about yourself and the work with the council?
Yes, thanks, Dan. So, I'm a Deputy Director for Cyber Policy at the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, which is one of the central government departments in the UK. We're, I think, probably most similar to the Department for Commerce here in the US. I have been involved in the council for the whole of its journey, more or less, and it's one of my key areas of responsibility. I think at the moment, my concern is to try and drive up the adoption rate. We have only about 500 people on the professional register so far, which we're very much in startup mode, and we want to try to get that to a much more sustainable figure in a short period of time. In addition to looking after the council, I also have broader responsibility for UK cyber regulation. We have regulation for critical national infrastructure, regulation for consumer products, and we also do stuff around trying to grow the UK cyber sector, which is another important area for us.
Thank you. John France, you are the CISO at ISC Squared, which is a licensed body for the UK Cybersecurity Council that helps conduct the chartership attestation reviews. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and the role the IC has.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for coming and spending some time with us to learn a little bit about this journey. As mentioned, John France, CISO for IRC2. So the IRC2, we're a member-led organisation globally. We have around 265,000 members and associates, so globally representative of the market. Founding member of the UK Cybersecurity Council, along with a few others. We actively participate in the development not only of the Council's business and outcomes, but obviously the chartership scheme. I'm proud to say that I was one of the first cohort to actually attain the chartered status. So I have my lovely certificate framed up behind my desk, and I do point to that. And our organisation and me personally, I was one of the lead auditors of the pilot scheme to get the initial cohort through. to look at the pathways that professionals can take, and as one of the bodies that presents candidates to the chartering scheme is to attract membership to go through that, to build on that 500 number relatively rapidly. And we look at, obviously, our certifications like the CISSP as part of that journey, and I'm not going to call it pre-qualification, but at least compatible with the outcomes of chartering, alongside giving some insights to the council on how to grow that number. So that's a little bit about us.
Thank you. Lastly, we have Sean John, who is the CTO at NCC Group, which is a global cyber organization founded in, or based out of the UK, and you guys have been a key stakeholder and advisor on the program. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I'm Sean John, Chief Technology Officer at NCC Group. We're like 25th anniversary this year, a British cybersecurity company. We're going to mention that a lot in the next week. But we've been very involved in the council. We've got of those 500, we've got quite a few of the accredited individuals, particularly for testing. We're a big penetration tester, and one of the first cases for this certification scheme was to actually get everyone accredited to make sure that you're actually a good tester. And we're very supportive, sitting on a few of the technical advisory boards. I sit on the strategic one as well, really looking at how we can use the council to make sure that you've got that accreditation, that not as someone just done the exam, but there's been some actual attestation that they know what they're talking about. So if you get somebody who's been accredited by the council, you've got a basic level of professionalisation and skill, and we're very supportive of that. Because that's very important to us, that we deliver good quality work, and that anyone who's delivering work gets that, and we don't end up being in a competitive situation with people that aren't very good.
Thank you. So I have questions for each of you, but I'm going to start with you, Andrew, and then we're going to probably go to more an open format momentarily. But Andrew, so can you provide us a little more detail on the background of this UK Cybersecurity Council? What prompted its creation? What are its core objectives, and how does the UK government envision its role, not just domestically, but also potentially for a global standards setter for cybersecurity professionalization?
Thanks, Dan. I think there's a few problems which we really are banking on the council helping us to fix. Okay, so the first problem I've got is, if I go into schools in the UK and I ask young people what they aspire to be when they grow up, they will point to, my parents want me to be a doctor or an accountant or a lawyer. They look at the established professions. Now, those professions have been around a long time, and they've got architecture around them, and they've got status. Kudos, I like to call it. And I feel that we need to try and give a little bit of that to the UK and the global cybersecurity workforce. So there's firstly a question about giving it status, so that people actually feel that being a cyber professional is a great thing to be, that your parents would be proud of, to be blunt. That's the kind of culture change we're up against. The next thing is about those people who actually come in the door of the profession, because we want them to progress, we want to retain them in the workforce, and that means they have to have, understand how to progress through the workforce to have a rewarding career. That requires the architecture there as well. The third thing is about employers. So employers do not really know what they need. They know they've got a cybersecurity problem, but they don't really know who to hire, what kind of person they require, trying to assess, do you need an analyst or a pen tester, or do you need an architect? They don't understand this, and therefore recruitment ads, but we see this in the UK when we survey them, are not really helpful in getting the right people in the door of the organisation. And even if you know who you want, how do you actually assure yourself that that person is the right person with the right qualifications? And therefore, everyone sort of defaults to the same thing. They ask for the same fairly short list of certifications. They ask for the same numbers of years of experience, which is a pretty narrow pool. So we need to fix that problem for employers. And then the last thing which I think the council is going to fix for us is around helping government and regulators, know that we actually have trusted people in our most sort of sensitive environments. You know, what's the sort of quality to control to make sure that I'm actually handing the keys to somebody who's not going to do me over? So that's the sort of mission that the council needs to sort of try and fulfill, and the problem book I'm looking for it to fix.
Thank you. So, as the council has been working, right, and I think, John, right, ISC Squared has been a critical license body for the work to validate the professional experience or qualifications of a lot of the people that are going through this process, right, that Andrew was describing. Can you explain how do existing certifications like the CISSP fit into this new chartership model? And what has the collaboration thought around effective professionalization pathways been on this journey?
Yeah, great question. Well, let's sort of unpack a few myths here, which is professionalization doesn't just mean the acquisition of knowledge. It's actually got to be the application of that knowledge to the situation that you're facing. So the CISSP and many of our other certifications are competency-based. So they're knowledge-based, and there's an element of knowledge, but you have to be able to apply that to a situation. And that's where if you gain one of our certifications, you're compatible with the aims of chartering, which is to get a professional into that position. So you can build upon and sort of use composability aspects of gone through this. Our schemes typically require work experience as well. So on-the-job experience, the CISSP is 5 years, some other certs are slightly lower. But so you can't just go and sit an exam, take an exam, pass, and say, you're a CISSP, you've got to have that experience. That's directly transferable into the goals of the chartership. Also, the chartership has an element which is less technical and more around things like communication skills and being able to represent the principal professionally. That's what the pathway actually does. That's what the evaluation does. It not only looks at some of the competencies in technology, but it also looks at the capabilities of the individual. So it's that composability piece, I think, that really gives you a leg up. So if we bring a member through this process, we know that we've got a mark of quality that can build upon it and take them through to chartership. We're not the only chartering body as well. You know, I'm not so arrogant to say it's just our members. It's actually a number of the founding members, a number of chartering bodies. In fact, what are we called? We've got maybe a licensing body. A licensed body, not a chartering body. The chartering body is the council. But we can bring that membership forward. So it really is a professionalisation, a competency. It's some of the slightly softer skills that actually we need really to build on that workforce. So when you put someone through as a charter position and they attain it, an employer can say, great, I can build upon that. I know that's a trust mark. I know it's a competency mark and a capability mark.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So I think, Sean, right, building upon what Andrew said, right, and even John here, right, you yourself as a cyber professional, but also as an employer, are looking to take a lot of that. You guys work closely with the government. What tangible benefits, right, has NCC Group seen or anticipates seeing from the council's work? And kind of can maybe talk about a bit more how those charterships help you demonstrate the rigor in the cybersecurity practices and what impact that might have on your relationship with clients, right? I think we discussed early on, right, stuff around CREST and stuff might be of interest.
Yeah, so at the moment, one of the things that's happening in the UK with the council is to be CREST accredited, you have to actually, it's migrating across to the certification with the council, which is why we've taken it on board. We do a lot of testing for government and critical national infrastructure, and it's a requirement to have that certification. So then having that chartership is a key part of it. It's why we've been very active in the beginning up front. So then that has the benefit, just as being like, you know, check team leader and things like that we were able to prove the competency, get through and be actually on the panels and able to do the testing for the clients. But then it also has the benefit back for our employees that, yes, before that it was become check team leader, but now there's actually some development involved in getting the chartership, some extra career progression. And the thing for us is obviously hiring people up, whether as school leavers, graduates, or or from industry, we always want to have that progression and development of them. And previously it was like things like check and then check team leader, but actually having the chartership allows us that broader focus to think about how do you actually put together a training program, get people through, get them the certification experience they need to get to where they go. Because the challenge and the reason why we need the professionalisation is that pretty much everything's been sort of quite ad hoc for many people in terms of how we've done development and got careers and got into this career. And so it's actually providing that expectation, providing the career development plans to our employees, providing a good way of being able to recruit people, but then actually from a business perspective being able to say that we do have this assessment of the professionalisation of our people and the commitment and the fact that they're capable of doing what they should do. And the advantage of the chartership is it goes outside of just check, which is very specific, to giving the ability to make that more broader across more of our employees. We've mostly focused on that side at this point, but we've got a plan to look at how we can use that across the other parts and the other disciplines within the organisation.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to move into kind of more general open QA kind of to everyone here. But first, I guess to kind of continue building off, Andrew, what you said earlier, right? We often discuss the constitutionality or the constitutional role of government in establishing professional standards. So what responsibility should governments take in cybersecurity professionalization? Where should the industry see self-regulation take precedence? Andrew, maybe start with that.
Yeah, well, we get involved in this firstly because we are trying to raise the resilience of the UK against cybersecurity threats. That needs a quality workforce. And we do an annual survey to see the state of our workforce, and we can see the shortage, we can see the problems, and we're not going to be able to raise that resilience unless we do something about it. So we definitely have a role. In terms of what building this entity, well, it hasn't really happened by itself. There is essentially a market failure. So we have stepped in, as we do in a number of places, to try to resolve that market failure using a bit of government money, funding this to get this going, and then trying to sort of change the equation to try and make people want to actually join this mission, and then once that's resolved, we can step back again. The council was constituted independently, so it has a CEO, it has an independent board of trustees, it's established. It's actually got a curious British legal status to it that people enjoy over here, that it's got a royal charter, so it's established by the Privy Council. In fact, it was the last royal charter issued by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Once it's achieved, sustainability, we will step back as we have done with other areas. The other role of government here is to lead by example. If you actually look at where is the cyber workforce in probably globally, defending the public sector, defending government systems, defending public services. This is a large bulk of what the cyber workforce is doing, and we need to make sure that if we're talking about managing workforces under professional structures, that we do that with our own people. So we have a really big role there. But yes, I think constitutionally there's definitely a strong role for government involvement during this initiation phase, and we'll stick with it until it sticks.
Do you have any comments?
I think that's the important thing is that whole being able to develop the career and the approach. I mean, there's so many. I'm an ex-CISP. Sorry, I did have a CISP, and I used to have a CISP, and I used to have a CISM, and I used to have a CIPT. I've just gone like I'm old now. I can just say I used to do it, but that's the reality is that it's actually. Well, I still do it, but anyway, I'm off the prospect. But the reality is that there is so many different routes and different ways, and that is the challenge, and that's why having actually somebody come in and saying it's a special thing having the charter that in the UK that is what makes a profession. So you've got chartered accountants, I feel sorry for them, but chartered accountants, chartership from the medical perspective, that sort of thing. So it is that special thing that is that mark of professionalisation. That's a certain level of requirement that's over and above just getting the certification, because we've all worked with those people that they have to have 3 lines for their business card because they've got every certification. I think they've even got their National Cycling Proficiency Certificate on there as well. And they've got every single certification, and then they walk in and they can't actually do anything. So it's that key thing to make sure you've got that actual assessment of, are you competent, are you capable, not just a collector of certifications.
I'll sort of quickly comment on probably a little bit of work of the council, which, to Andrew's point, is to make our profession penetrable and understandable and has pathways. So if you consider sort of chartership slightly more at the pinnacle end of it, the upper end, the council actually does a lot of work at encouraging people into the profession and giving it, even within the chartership, there's a number of specialisms and there's ways into that. It's not just a lofty goal that hangs, mid-air that you can't reach. The council's work is making it reachable through some work in some of the education type elements and sort of curricular work, all the way through to promoting the profession and understanding what job roles are and actually also what they're not. And then obviously to the chartership is that professionalisation and the competency piece. And some of the requirements there are things like continued professional education. So it's not a static skill set either. What we learn and what we experience has somewhat of a shelf life. So you have to keep current with things as well. So unfortunately, you've let yours lapse, but we forgive you.
And I'll be honest, because I had too many, and so the continuing professional education, I did the continuing professional education. It was just the work of filling in the form, and COVID hit. So I'm sorry, but I think that because it was literally, it took me a day a year to fill in all my a day every 2 years, so to fill in all my CPEs, which is why I let it lapse. But actually, to that point, one of the most really useful things in the council and the specialisms is you can go onto the specialism, you can see the type of roles that are in it, you can see the sort of body of knowledge that you should be developing to do things, the sort of career progression, the certifications that might be useful, because that's one of the conversations everyone has is, I want to get into this, how do I, what are the skill sets I need to develop, how do I need to go? It's sort of like quite easy for, and then there's people like me who have had all the certification, and you ask us how we got into it. If you of a certain age, we all sort of fell into it. So there's no actual route of how do you get into it. So we're now trying to say, in our 50s, to people that are in their 20s, how do you start a career? And I literally, everyone my age, we did not start in cyber because it wasn't called cyber at that point. It was IT security, information security, and it used to be a policy thing. And so we're all trying to say, how do you develop a career and talk to people trying to do it from the beginning when none of us have experience of doing it from the beginning, or allowing people to retrain from other careers. So actually having the council to provide that roadmap for people is extremely useful.
Yeah, I don't think the term, how did you get into this career? The answer can't be by accident.
Unfortunately, it is for all of us. Though.
For us, it was by accident. For others, it shouldn't be.
And I think like a lot of that, right, is that's no longer a pathway, right? So as the profession is adapting, the council is looking to provide that change pathway to ensure the next generations of things.
Because the challenge we've got now is we're asking 22-year-olds for 5 years of experience. Yeah, it's like, how do you get the route to allow people to show some competence to get into the career?
Yes. So one of the topics we want to touch upon, right, is that this professionalization conversation, right, isn't just about the UK. Want to make sure, right, that the UK's leadership and the work that we're doing here, led by DCID and with the council, right, becomes a global catalyst, right? What steps can other countries, regional organizations take to align or adopt similar rigor? Maybe Andrew, you could tell us a little bit more around council, how it's set up to support and align with some of the countries that I mentioned earlier from the collaboration work that you guys are doing?
So the rationale for why we're doing this is not a unique problem which is in the UK only. Most of our allies have the same challenges which they are trying to face. So there's definitely appetite from other countries to partner with us in doing this. The nature of cybersecurity and the way the business operates is, of course, global. You know, most companies, if they're not operating globally themselves, they are purchasing services which are being run, managed across borders. We, of course, are also talking about, you know, changing the rules of the road a bit here. You have to get into this club if you want to play. But I don't want that to become do I dare talk about trade barriers in the current climate, but I'm definitely not creating a trade barrier, even a technical trade barrier. Lastly, there's a sort of need for pace in delivering this project, which means that the UK can't do it on its own. You know, we should be working with others, and of course, other nations have actually built components of this that we can lift and shift into this framework. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. So we have been working globally. You described the coalition at the start that we've set up with other countries. And there are a few of those countries who are actually pretty far advanced as well. I mean, obviously, we claim to be the leaders, but there you go.
I was going to say, maybe Sean, for you, right, kind of as a bit of a follow-up on that, right? Obviously, the council's work, right, in this is setting a stage. Are you seeing kind of from your company's global operational perspective, any stuff, is it helping translate to other countries that you're working in setting more standard job descriptions and stuff?
Yeah, so obviously we're supporting of the council getting connected internationally for the requirements, but you're right, in terms of actually thinking about what you need to do to get the status with the council allows us to think about how do we put together that same job description, that same standards, and apply that globally. In a way, we're doing that a little bit with the sort of Czech team leader was then becoming the hallmark of what are the key requirements that you need globally, and so I mean that is another British scheme that's become a de facto standard in a way without actually being applied across the globe. A lot of people do it, and then obviously things like working with people like Crest. So this is actually, it is a really good statement, the fact that you've then got to go through that criteria to meet this one requirement. It creates a really good model and training, and we tend to roll out our training globally, even if we've got certain certification requirements in different areas. And so the council work is then becoming that model that we can use globally in the same way that we were using Czech in the past. And obviously Czech is very, very specific to pen testing. The advantage now to start looking at what you can do for governance and compliance and some of the other disciplines that we have within our organisation, because yes, a large part of our business is pen testing and red teaming, but then we also do governance and compliance and consulting and implementation, and these are all and we have SOC, and there are all specialisms like that are being set up in the council. So it's almost like taking that same model and allowing it to be applied across different disciplines. So in certain things like Czech, you've got a lot of rigour, but in implementation, and I know that's one of the particular problems for the government, is worrying about the people that are going in to build solutions for critical national infrastructure. Have they actually got the skill set to do it? So I know quite often the question is, can they actually even do Cyber Essentials, which is sort of the UK standard for baseline? Do you have people with that skill set? And that's always been a little bit more amorphous than something that's very easy to define, like pen testing. So it's being able to take that model and apply it across the rest of the world, and then we can use that globally.
I mean, I'll echo, it's about reinforcing the model. Many constituent members of the council are international in nature and what they offer in terms of their certifications. So, skill set and competency mobility is a big thing. Putting the chartering model around it and potentially exporting that means that we can avail ourselves, we, the general community, and not only the UK, can avail itself of the available skill sets through that. So it is about, in essence, mobility and understandability of that, I think.
And of course, we're not starting from a blank page here. And ISC2, you have a large membership globally, and all those cyber professionals who've gone to the trouble of gaining your certifications want to see what the pathway is in. But if we are creating a pathway into this, we might as well try and join this up internationally, so that it's not just a key to getting into the UK, but also allows you to operate in other places. And it's really helpful that we have a mix of licensed bodies, some of whom are UK based and others are very much internationally focused.
Slightly changing topics a little bit, going back to something I think both Andrew, you and Sean said earlier, right? So professional transformation, right, of the profession in cybersecurity, right, draws parallels to historical things around, or the evolution, I should say, of law, engineering, medicine, right? How might these lessons from what we've seen from these prior established programs guide, right, the path forward in terms of the work that the council's doing, and what unique challenges does cybersecurity face that these other fields maybe didn't encounter during their professionalization journey? Sorry if there's a little more.
Like I say, I think it took about 200 years for surgeons to professionalise, didn't they? They were like barbers and chopping people's legs off in the back of meat shops or whatever to begin with. And then, so they had 200 years to go there. And then even though medicine is advancing, the actual basics of some of these things hasn't really changed. And I think I'm dangerous to talk about accounting, but I think since double entry bookkeeping, it's not had major revolutionary changes of what it's doing. So to me, from my view, the thing for cyber is, one, obviously very changing world, even the evolution of the career while I've been in it, the fact that we even have this row, is it cyber or IT or info, and people just need to get over it because it's called cyber because people that don't work in cyber call it cyber. But that whole journey, even in 30 years, that same journey took 200 years in other professions, and so you got to that speed thing, and the fact that we don't want to take 200 years to professionalise cybersecurity. We want to do it now, and we want to have that position, and it's that thing we've been talking about. How do we create profession? I have a lot of calls and conversations about that. I've been having them for 10, 15 years, actually having a body whose sole focus is that. They're not there, although they are working very closely with the certification bodies and all the ones you'd think of are on that list. They're not there to sell a certification. They're there to prove a competency and prove a professional and prove an outcome. And so that's why, the more organisations we can get in the UK to work with them to make them successful, the more we can adapt. So I did once go to a history lesson at the Royal College of Surgeons, and I think there was a whole, when they went through their chartership and professionalism, there's a whole other group that refused to do it and carried on chopping off legs in the back of, I don't know, wherever it might be, for a long time. And it's that whole thing of how do we actually all come together and drag. We can't afford to have that delay and that friction in a world where we've got a real threat, and we really need to have professionalism.
I think one or two of the lessons we took from, or should take if we haven't taken already, is those bodies were set up for a number of good reasons. One was information sharing, knowledge sharing. Another was to cope with the rate of change within their profession, and actually marking that as something that you have to keep pace with. And the other one was safety, whether that be patient safety or whether it be building safety in the case of architects or others, law in terms of sustainability. So I think some of those lessons also directly translate to us. We're just going to have to do it at a much faster pace. You said 30 years, I would have gone 50 years, but it's decades, not centuries of kind of background that we've got. So take some of those lessons, and a large part of it is safety to operate, and I think that's what chartering gives us. It's a case of you can now actually say that profession is safe. Do I put that in brackets? But to a standard. Is
it almost like a license to operate? I mean, that's one thing we use internally. We actually, our whole training now for people internally, and includes the certification program of that, is people have to go through certain skill sets and training and tick some boxes to get the license to operate to do certain work. Okay. So if you want to be a pen tester, there are certain skill sets and levels you've got, and then you get the license to operate, and at that point you can get scheduled onto the work. And it's that whole idea in the same way as like having that license to operate.
Yeah, we consulted publicly on whether we should have a license to practice, license to operate scheme in the UK. And I think basically everybody said, that would be a really good place to get to. But you have to be realistic about how you get there. Because if I put in this too early, I close down the pool of people who can actually defend the nation. And then I make ourselves even more vulnerable. So it's got to be managed in a careful way. So that's important. I absolutely agree about pace. Every other workforce, every other profession has had a lot of time to do this. We are definitely seeing a global context which is making us prioritize cybersecurity in a way that doesn't give us the luxury of time. The other thing, which I feel like we need to keep an eye on, is keeping it simple. So there are definitely some professions who have quite complex architectures in terms of the number of bodies who are operating in that space and the relationships between them and how professional members can transition between them. And it just feels like it's maybe an inevitable result of the long history they've been through, but I think we need to have an architecture which allows us to try and keep everything in a more tidy and organized manner, because complexity costs, and we don't want to add cost here.
So I guess from what I'm hearing, kind of even from all of you, right, is the fact that cyber, the threats we're facing, right, is causing a lot of change, right? And by trying to put a simple architecture in that we can build and scale upon, will hopefully drive a bit more consistency, right? And then we can also drive a little bit more accountability, right? So that's why it's starting to feel, with everything that's been going on, now's the time to lay the groundwork and the foundation for this. Is that fair, Samarzi?
Yeah, you can have the job.
All right. Kind of building, I think it's personally building off of that, right? So the council's chartership aims to create a culture, and I think culture is super important for any program, right, that's being operationalized, right? But while the council's chartership aims to create that culture where technically qualified advice is not only heard, but it carries weight, how do we ensure, right, that this cultural shift happens? Should cybersecurity professionals have constitutional or statutory advisory roles in key decisions similar to general counsels in the law profession?
I mean, so the first reason I gave for why we won this mission is to try and give status to this profession. Yeah. And you know, if I'm if I look at my role in government, you know, if I am trying to devise some piece of legislation or giving some advice to a minister, I'm duty bound to get in the lawyers and check that what I'm proposing is lawful. My ministers are obliged to follow the law. It's part of our ministerial code, and it would be seriously problematic if they didn't. So if I can't just reject that advice, I think it has a quality and a status. You know, similarly, if I was like trying to, organize a new head office building, and I didn't like what the architect had drawn and wanted to move this pillar, you can't do that, can you? But in cyber, people, the cyber professional goes to the board, sets out their view, and then, well, they're told they're wrong. So I think it is important that they have a certain status. Now, of course, we've seen with like data protection a real kind of transition in recent years, haven't we, with the sort of data protection officers, particularly in the sort of European context under the GDPR, and what their sort of role is, and who are they really working for? Are they working for the business, or are they working for the regulator? All that kind of debate. But it has given them a status, and I think that's a good thing. So we would like the whole mission around the UK Cybersecurity Council to try to give cyber professionals that status, to allow them to carry weight in board decisions, to allow their view to have an authority that maybe they don't have at the moment. And yes, you sometimes have to deliver bad news, and
you shouldn't be punished for that. That is your duty and your responsibility. So there is definitely something about the constitutional role which is developing in this territory. And if the UK Cybersecurity Council can develop that and build the profession accordingly, then I'm a big fan.
Sounds great in theory, but from a practical perspective, right? If we get that increased recognition in the profession, right? Obviously, right, as maybe we've seen growing up where there's a lot of challenges, right, that could still kind of be scapegoated, right? So how do we change that narrative, right? Like, are there any boundaries or guardrails that we can think of to put in place to ensure, right, that these credentialed professionals are not unfairly scapegoated, as you kind of alluded to right now when we're going, right? So obviously we're trying to change the narrative in terms of how cyber as a change management, assurance type of profession, right, is able to hold weight, right? And it's not just looked at as, oh, you're creating FUD, right, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right, across others. So, right, you want to maintain that public accountability, but it feels like we probably still need some guardrails to make sure that, so does it sound like we need to go, that I'm saying that we're doing this, right, the DPO type of path have a little bit more independence, or does the chartership itself provide enough guardrails for the profession, or a professional then?
I'd sort of say, isn't the chartership the first step on the road to getting that respect and getting that sign-off? So if you're going to say, I want to be able to invest and say, listen to this advice and take it seriously, you first need to know that that advice is based upon a good skill set and a level of competency. So therefore, you say this is the councils at the beginning of the journey. That first bit is let's start getting some certified and approved professionals, and then we start to look at what does that mean in terms of measuring. So yeah, you have to listen to the professional, but there's like, so if you've got somebody who's a chartered, I forgot the name of the pen tester one, whatever that chartership is, they're there to tell you about the threats, the vulnerabilities, and how they break in and give you recommendations to fix it. They're not then necessarily chartered in giving you risk advice. It's just the same in terms of, I'm trying to think of the different architect charterships. There's certain ones that can give you certain advice and others that can't. Yeah, so if you go like, or in engineering, you know, an electrical engineer can tell you all about the electronics. They're not going to tell you about the construction of the building. And it's that principle of having the different specializations, and this is what I'm approved for. So the first step in saying, if you're not going to have like a regulatory requirement, which is where the DPO comes from, is the first step is, are these competent individuals in what they're talking about? Yes, they are. Now then, actually, what are the things that we need to then listen to and work with it? And then the guardrails need to build out from there. I don't think we're there yet, but I think that's part of the journey we're on.
And I would sort of comment that we've got, you've got to have liquidity in the market, right? Which is the ability to actually advise and the opportunity to. They're slightly different, and they're building. So you mentioned GDPR and some of the, there's a regulatory push. We've seen the march of regulation generally, globally in fact, around cybersecurity. In the States, the SEC rulings and actually some of the court cases that have followed it have started to push that kind of advice into boardrooms. The natural state of play is probably cyber is going to be one of the top 5 organizational risks on pretty much any organization's risk register. And it would be weird if you didn't have advisors coming to advise the board, or at least decision makers on that. But then that might open the opportunity, but the actual capability to advise is based on recognizing an expert or someone that's competent to give you that advice. So I think that is, we're growing in lockstep both on both sides of that coin, I think.
We have in the UK a code of practice for the governance of companies around cybersecurity. And you know, there are things that boards are supposed to do about appointing responsibility of certain individuals, making sure that people with the right competence are filling particular roles. You need to have behind statements like that means of actually identifying who is the competent person. And if you have a chartered individual who's credible and capable, they're very well positioned to fill that role. And with the kudos that they have from the cyber profession, I think it allows them and empowers them to actually perform their role much better.
That's good. So want to give a chance. Anybody in the audience have any questions? All right, so let's we'll get towards wrapping this up. So we do have an apply slide here, right? So obviously, right, we figured we'd try to think about things in the framing of next week, in 3 months or 6 months. But I guess maybe I'll, instead of kind of going through that in detail, closing thoughts, maybe start with you, Sean.
Okay, I was waiting to listen to what everyone else said so I could build on that. But no, the closing thoughts is it is one of those things of how do we professionalise that we hear across the globe. Yeah, we need to be treated seriously. We need to be taken seriously. We need to be professionalised. We need to know what a good standard of knowledge is. And I know there's a lot of different activities happening in that space. Hopefully with the council, with collaborating internationally as well. And the fact that it isn't like they've gone and created their own new certification locally. It's using the existing certifications and looking at how do we build the wrapper around that. That's the right way to work for me, rather than going, let's create some new set of tests or certifications that people have to do on top of it, and then that just becomes very parochial and built on that country. This is, I think, a really good step back and look at what are the things we need to do, how do we break it down, how do we professionalise it and work it globally. So the more that we can get international collaboration on that and adoption, I think the better.
John?
Yeah, really quickly for me, certification, obviously I've got to say this, is part of that journey. Lean on it, lean into it, build upon it. And I think what the council's doing and what the chartership's doing is building a penetrable pathway to being the trusted advisor that is known for being competent and actually can help businesses and governments and nations build a more secure world. I mean, that's got to be the ultimate outcome.
I think we are seeing in more and more places that it is becoming a requirement that you meet a higher threshold. Sean has talked about that if you want to be a pen tester in UK government or critical national infrastructure, you have to get your bit of paper from the council. With the governance piece, increasingly it'll be the case that if you want to actually have the corporate governance that's required, you need to have somebody looking after your cybersecurity who's probably got a bit of paper from the council. And we'll see this develop further. If you look at what we have in a lot of our regulation around critical national infrastructure, that there are requirements in what we call the cyber assessment framework about the quality of your workforce. And wherever we use the word quality, there has to be an assurance system on how we actually know that we've met that threshold. A bit of paper from the council is what's likely to be required. So I think we need everybody to understand the direction of travel. That is why I think in the UK market, the council was finally taking shape. We've just done a recent survey of the UK cyber workforce, and when asked, 70% of the UK cyber workforce are now familiar with the council and planning to take steps towards getting on board, which is an amazing result. We're only a few years down the road, and I think people are really waking up to it. So with all the international progress that we've made in the last 12 months, the new coalition, we have a huge ambition for where this project's going to go.
That's great. So hopefully for everyone here in the audience, right, this conversation, right, was meant to help show the UK's efforts, which is more than just about the national standards, right? This is about setting that global example. So obviously we want to make sure that we keep the dialogue open as we build out the profession, and hopefully we can earn and command the trust of everyone in here. So thank you for your time today, and much appreciated.
Thanks all.